The restoration industry is under siege. Sales are soft, margins are razor thin, getting paid feels like pulling teeth. This is a wartime environment, and restoration leaders need battle-tested tactics that work when everything's on the line. You're listening to Mission Critical, the podcast where the industry's elite operators share the systems, strategies, and scars from the trenches. I'm Leighton Healey, the CEO of Know How, and we spotlight restorers who refuse to go quietly into the night. My guests today are Chris Hambro and Matt White from Peerless Restoration, a 3-generation family business serving central Illinois since 1945. Last summer, 3 massive jobs hit simultaneously. Their biggest mold project ever, a 3-month commercial ventilation job, and a major downtown fire. Key leaders needed the same technicians. No one had them to give. Most companies would call it a nightmare quarter. Chris and Matt call it the crucible that built muscle that they didn't know they had. Chris came from outside restoration after running the local Chamber of Commerce. Matt grew up in the business, but came back on his own terms after his parents never pressured him to join. Together, they're the operators who turned a communication crisis into their edge. When the perfect storm hit, their system showed cracks, so they rebuilt. Weekly meetings where courage means speaking the truth, 6 to 8 week plans that turn techs into project managers, and metrics that track promises kept instead of revenue. This conversation covers what they fixed after running out of people, how they make communication a company-wide activity, and why Chris gets frustrated when business slows, because they want to be stretched like that again. So let's get into it. Well, hey everyone. Hope you're doing well. I'm on here with 2 top operators, friends of mine from Peerless Restoration, and I'm on with Chris and Matt, and we're going to get into it, and we're going to talk about some of the ways that they're driving some really impressive results at their business, and we're going to cover a lot of ground here in a short amount of time. But let's kick things off with some introductions. Chris, I have had the pleasure of knowing you from the first time you and I chatted, and you started talking to me about this passion you have for building leaders. And immediately I found what I believe is kind of a kindred spirit in investing in teams and building up your people. Let's start with you, Chris. Give us kind of the 60 seconds on Chris that kind of, leads us to, what are some of the main hats that you wear at Peerless? And then I'm going to come and we're going to do the same thing with Matt.
Very good. No, thanks for having us on. We are honored to join you. Yeah, the 60-second version. So I've been at Peerless for just about 4 years. Our owner, Brad White, and I have been really best friends for 20 years. We work together on some different boards in our community and have done some strategic planning together. And there came a point where he thought it would be a smart move. I would probably disagree, where he invited me to come on board about 4.5 years ago to join the Peerless team and help provide some strategic direction and leadership. So while I've been here 4 years, there's oftentimes, depending upon the day or the days of the week, where I feel like I'm still brand new. I've been drinking out of the fire hose for a pretty good while, but it's an industry that I loved it from afar through our friendship, and now having lived in it for the last 4 years, enjoy it and the challenges it brings much more. I will say one of the key hats I think I wear is, I believe one of the things that solid leaders are doing differently these days is really learning to find ways to invest in our team members. And it's one of the things that we do around here through some leadership development books that we work through together once a week as a part of our kind of our weekly journey and weekly calendar to help take our current division and executive team leaders as well as our emerging leaders and hopefully help them grow both personally as well as professionally as we work together through some of those studies that we've implemented here.
So Matt, part of the Peerless team, someone who's, never met you before. Tell us about yourself. How'd you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so Peerless, I've grown up around it my whole life. So started with my grandpa and my grandma ran it together. And then my dad, when he took over. So my whole life, I grew up around it, whether running around the warehouse or, my dad going out on call late night when it was really just him and a few of his main people going out and on call and holding the pager and stuff like that. And then, starting in high school, I worked a little bit, just kind of humping equipment and stuff like that, just general labor anywhere that needed help. Went to college for a few years and came back and then really got into it, full swing of things. And I just really fell in love with the industry and the idea of growing a small business and also, help serving families and the community and, business owners that are around us in our community. So I have my hands in operations. Like I said, I grew up kind of doing operations, but now transitioning more into the business development and sales side of things as well. So kind of spread out a little bit everywhere throughout the company.
Between yourself and Chris, I mean, we could pretty much drill into any part of, Peerless's operation and at least get an opinion, right? So
Yes, that's for sure.
That's pretty good. So hey, let me, because Matt, hey, full disclosure, I have kind of a bit of a passion for businesses that successfully transfer generationally, and understanding those, and so I'd like to come back to that.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, this may not surprise you, but I go to a lot of conferences in the industry, and I get to have a lot of, I call them this the second drink conversation. The first drink, everyone's kind of meeting everyone. Yeah. And then that second drink, everyone's kind of settled into whatever conversation they've got into. And I have a lot of second drink conversations with leaders and owners and individuals behind some of these businesses that are driving these businesses forward. And one of the things that when I ask them just point blank, hey, so what's keeping you up at night these days? One of the things that is a consistent keep me up at night is my kids don't want anything to do with this business, and I've poured my life into it, and so much of the justification for me pouring my life into this business and missing some of their little league games was, well, I want to pass it on to them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then their kids are like, no thanks, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I'm coming back to that.
Yeah.
And it might turn into a therapy couch, Matt. I don't know.
That sounds good. I can always use a good therapy couch.
But I want to go to you, Chris. So Chris, one thing I know about you, Chris, and you could fact check me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, is that you spent some time leading the Chamber of Commerce in your neck of the woods. And so when you say, you spent some time watching this business from afar, watching this industry from afar, and then you really came to appreciate the industry before you joined it. Matt commented on that as well. I mean, Chris, I think you came from someone who has more perspective, more visibility on different industries than most, with your involvement representing probably dozens and dozens of industries in the Chamber of Commerce. So first question, followed by a quick follow-up. Is that fair? Is that a fair comment? And then if it's fair, from that perspective, having a broad understanding of different businesses that power a community, what is it about restoration that I would say kind of pulled at your heartstrings?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Whether I had my hands involved really closely with certain industries or businesses, the chamber I served as CEO was about 1,500 member businesses. So a sizable organization. Lots of industries represented. So I may have known very little about some of those when I moved into that role, but I think learned a lot about a lot of industries during that time. Some of them a fairly deep dive, depending upon the community projects that we were involved in and the different members that were involved in those projects specifically. To your question about restoration, I think the thing most of all that kind of grabs me is not just the idea, but the experience of being able to walk into a situation where somebody's largest asset, their home, their commercial facility has been damaged, it's in jeopardy, and we have the opportunity to walk into people's lives at their most stressful moment and help bring order out of the chaos that exists. We talk a lot about making promises at Peerless. We make promises to our community. We make promises to our clients. We make promises to folks that we hope will trust us enough to give us an opportunity to serve them. It's a big deal for us to deliver on our promises that we've made. Oftentimes you could sum it up that way, that we walk in when there is chaos, and when we leave, people's lives have kind of been reshaped, put back together, and there's a sense of order and a sense of calm, and that is a really rewarding thing.
And what have you found, Chris? Because I think many people in the industry you'd get an amen, but then you'd also get I've heard that. One of the things that I'm curious from your perspective as someone who came into the industry 4 years ago, what would be your advice for how a company could more effectively communicate what you just described to the incoming workforce? Like, that is the experience, that is the, let's call it, that is at the heart of what is, let's call it, kind of powering a lot of the people in this industry that get it. What would be your advice for how to package that more effectively so that, prospects and candidates can just kind of get a glimpse of that as they're evaluating, opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll do my best shot at it. I've been fortunate enough that I've had an opportunity to do a handful of things professionally over I won't tell you my age, but it's up there. And I have learned over time, and I think this is a common thread in all of us, that we find our greatest sense of reward and sense of fulfillment when we can make a difference in somebody else's life and somebody else's circumstances. That's like gasoline for me. That is fuel on the fire. I think if folks, I would always I've encouraged our own kids, find something that is going to be rewarding, not because dollars and cents matter, right? We all have to make a living and raise a family and do what, invest in the things we choose to invest in financially. But ultimately, when my head hits the pillow at night, it hits the pillow and I can feel good about what I've done because I know there's a sense of giving back and a sense of making a difference. And I think for most human beings, when we find that thing, it is that fuel, is that ever sustaining kind of thing in our lives, especially when we're in the middle of a huge water run and we're doing 16-hour days for, 14 days in a row, and you said, this is why we do what we do. Can we get 16 more hours tomorrow so we can do some more?
Yeah.
So I just think that's an important piece. I don't have much wisdom, but I think it's in our human nature to give back and find the way that it works like that for us.
Yeah. Makes me think of, and I'm coming to you, Matt. I've got a question for you, Matt, but it makes me think of, I think it was an old Irish playwright who said, like, one of the greatest consolations of life is that you cannot truly help someone without helping yourself, and there, I think that, I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but there's something interesting that when you lend a hand, that there is, and it's not that it's the motivation, but there is almost indirect and sometimes value that you experience. I think especially when you go into it, that in a sense that wasn't your motivation, right? And so, Matt, let me ask you a question here, and I just want to take some time, and then I know there's some questions we wanted to talk through, so we'll get to those. But I just Matt, your situation is, whether you think of it this way or not, is unique in that you're part of a generational business. You're part of a business. I understand it as your grandfather got this business going. Your dad stepped in. You're stepping in. Not to say that from the moment you can remember having your first own goals and motivations, that from that very moment you wanted to run this business. So probably there's been some zigs and zags.
Yes.
But you're in it and you're rocking the hat, and I bet whether your dad says it or not, it probably is an enormous source of pride for him that you're in the business. And so there's a lot of people in the industry that I think it's their deep desire that their kids would step into some role in the business. So here's the question. First question. Was there anything intentional that you think your folks did that led to you being interested in being involved in the business?
That's a great question, and never really thought about it. But now that you ask it, I don't think my dad and mom never really drove me to get in this. They always kind of wanted to support me and whatever I wanted to do. And it was more of, go out there and see what's out there for you and see what you kind of love to do. And they always supported me, and I was very thankful and very fortunate. They didn't. My dad, he wasn't like, hey, this is what you're doing, or this is what you got to do. So they always wanted me to have my dreams and try to go out there and fulfill those if I could. But at the end of the day, for me, coming back and, working, having the opportunity to work with my dad and try to help continue what he's grown and, put my stamp on something as well was once I started getting ingrained within the business, it became a no-brainer for me. And I couldn't even imagine being anywhere else. That's for sure.
And how do you balance, like, here's just some stereotypical things, right?
Yeah.
Let me just put some stereotypical things on the table. My colleagues who I work with won't take me seriously because I'm the boss's son.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, that's a great question too. That also I felt like I've struggled with, over the years, but eventually I think, you got to be out there. I think, being in the field has helped me a lot, and growing up in the trenches, as you say, with those guys makes a huge difference. But it does, I think, so that's a huge factor, and then obviously as you take more responsibility, little by little, I think eventually that turns a little bit, but it's definitely a very good point. It's something that I struggle with, a little bit internally, and may put a little more pressure on myself, even if it's not necessarily as big of a deal as it may be, to others within our organization, if that makes sense.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it makes sense. I mean, I think that what I'm hearing you say is that, through whatever journey you've been on, you've recognized the value of, like, coming up from the ground up, being able to have like a full picture of the business, and having spent time shoulder to shoulder with the crews. And I've just got one more question on this theme that I wanted to direct to you, Chris. But I just wonder, Matt, just one last question on this topic, and who knows, maybe we'll circle back to it if it's relevant. But if perhaps somebody flips the recording of this conversation to someone who is their folks run a business like this, and they're just feeling really either cold to the idea of getting involved, or they've just kind of seen what it cost their parents to build this business, and they're like, I just don't think that the juice is worth the squeeze. And yet it's the desire of their parents' heart that the business would stay in the family. What would be your counsel to just kind of like a second generation, or a next generation individual, just kind of just considering that crossroads that they're at?
So essentially you're saying if someone's debating whether staying kind of and getting ingrained in their family business or going a different direction, kind of,
yeah,
I
exactly.
would say there's nothing more rewarding for me, quite frankly, that I've found. And as the more and more I get involved in it, and the opportunity to do it with, the people you love, that also makes a huge difference. And I think it's to be very prideful about. And there's a lot to be said for that. And it can be very difficult at times. I mean, as Chris knows, he's mediator and thousands of times between me and my dad, because we're both very passionate people. And usually he's right, you know what I mean, most of the time. And I'm learning to, but I think there's just something to be said about, working alongside of your family and helping grow a legacy and a brand name in your family name. And I think there's a lot, for at least for me, that's something that I just love. I just love it. So.
Well said. Yeah, I think that's really well said. Chris, quick follow up on that. I mean, Chris, you have the advantage of kind of having been, kind of a half participant, half wallflower, to just observing how the business has, made space for, encouraged, fostered, and yet tried to create, some, let's call it a culture of equal opportunity, right? For Matt to be part of. Is there anything that you'd be comfortable sharing that you've observed? And again, guys, just to qualify why I'm like, what is up with this? Why is Leighton going after this? It's just because it's so broad. Like, we wrote like an entire section of a book that we published on the challenge of like generational businesses, because we were surprised how widely felt this heartache was, that this industry is so demanding that one of the painful byproducts is that my kids don't want anything to do with it. And for me, what fueled so much of my desire to kind of get through some of those tough years was, I want to be able to build a generational business. And so is there anything, Chris, that you've observed just that's happened in the Peerless business that you believe has contributed to creating an environment where
that legacy looks like it's going to continue on with Matt and maybe other siblings. I'm not sure. But is there anything you've observed?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there's a lot of things. There's probably a whole different podcast, maybe. But I think, as with Brad and I being really good friends for a number of years, I've watched, again, from afar and I've known Matt since he was probably before high school. But I've had a unique seat. And I would say Brad is what I would call an opportunity provider. He's a guy who likes to open doors for people, and he gives them permission to walk through that door, but he's not somebody who's going to push you through the door. He's going to say, here's an opportunity for you, and it's here for the taking, but you have to have the guts, if it's a challenge or a risk, the wherewithal to walk through the door and say, okay, this is something I really want to do. And I've seen him, heck, it's in a lot of ways, he's done that with me. I mean, here's a guy from outside the industry and said, hey, I want you to come in here. And in short order, he said, okay, hey, I really don't want anybody, but can you just lead this thing day to day, and you be the person who reports to me and other folks report up to you. And while you're doing that, by the way, can you help mentor Matt along the way? And so I would say it's been unique and yet Matt summed it up really well. I have yet to see him when he was a young, high schooler all the way up to today. I've yet to see him put pressure on him that this is something he wants him to do or he needs for him to do, even though I suspect it's probably, the desire of his heart to see that happen. But instead he's given him an opportunity, and I think he's surrounded him and provided him the tools, hopefully some good people around him to help walk beside him in that journey if he decides to go through that door, so I don't know if that means much to others who might be listening, but I think there is this tightrope to walk between providing an opportunity and pulling somebody through the door, between opening the door and giving folks the chance to walk through it, but they have to do it on their own with the support they need around them. Does that make sense? And to be in the seat that, it's been an honor of my lifetime to sit here and be in this seat and kind of be a part of watching all that unfold and, contributing here or there along the way to it.
Well, to respond, I think it makes sense. It might be valuable to find out if that makes sense to you, Matt. Matt, does that make sense to you?
Yes, it 100% does. Chris, I think you summed that up perfectly. Actually, I mean, you couldn't have said it.
Yeah, there was one of the industry conferences, the Core Collective. They had a speaker, a gentleman that I've gotten to know from a previous a company I was involved in leading, and he is a very popular speaker, consultant, and he focuses his work is focused on COOs, and so he wrote a book called Second in Command. And as you were talking, I almost think that the industry would benefit from some type of an initiative, and maybe Matt and Chris, maybe this is maybe we strike hands together and we just do this, but it almost seems like they would benefit from creating some kind of a next in command, almost like a next in command kind of, focused on these kind of generational businesses, because I personally, I just believe much like a tree that just, the deeper the roots, I think the more resilient that tree is. And similarly, I think that, as each successive generation passes, there's an opportunity for the roots that organization has within its community, within the lives of the family, within so many different factors. I think it just creates a more enduring and an organization that can frankly do more good within the organization it's rooted with, or the community it's rooted in. So really excited. Guys, let me shift gears, because one of the things that I invited you to talk about is the climate of the climate of the industry today is such that I really think that there's a lot of adages that say something to the extent of, tough markets, tight operators, you know what I mean? Like, there's something about being in the pressure cooker that really pushes out kind of fluff strategies and really gets us back to the basics of just really good operational practices. It also makes us to be innovative. And so I want to talk about that, because just to set the table, right now in the industry, there is, for a variety of reasons, there are some tough headwinds for a lot of businesses. Maybe not all businesses, but for a lot of businesses, there's a lot of headwinds. I have the advantage of, being part of a team where we collaborate with great organizations like C&R Magazine, Restoration Industry Association. We do a lot of these studies. And so we kind of get a front row seat to the data on the industry. And, I can't get into any of the data here because those are all being written and analyzed and all this stuff. But I can tell you that, it's another tough year in the industry for a large majority of the businesses. And I really look at Peerless as a business that, I'm not saying you guys do everything right. I'll let you say that. I'll let you on the record say you're doing everything right. But I really respect so many elements of what I've learned about, what I've observed, and what I've heard about Peerless, and your commitment to, regardless of the market climate, to deliver on what you promise. And I think that's a very weighty statement, Chris. I think you say that very intentionally. I don't think that's something you say very flippantly. I think you take that. I know you take that very seriously. And so let me ask just this opening question. So because I want to ask you guys a bunch of questions around how you do things. So let's just kind of set the backdrop here. So I'll put the question to either you or Matt. Maybe I'll start with you, Chris, and then we'll Matt, feel free to add any color. But could you give us the last 12 months? Just give us the last 12 months in a minute or so. What's the dynamic for you in the market? If you're open to it, what have been some highs and lows in the business, challenges, wins? Just set the table for us so we have kind of a good understanding of where you're coming from.
Sure, I'll take a crack at it, and Matt and take the baton here in a sec. But I would just say, this time last year, 12 months ago, we were blessed and fortunate in 2024 to have a terrific year. But last summer, we were in the midst of 3 very large jobs for a company our size, all at the same time. It stretched our people in ways they've probably never been stretched, from a production standpoint, a schedule standpoint, an efficiency standpoint. It was like the perfect storm. We had, a lot of weather events, which certainly contribute to our world in water work. We do a lot of commercial ventilation cleaning. We had a huge job that lasted for about 3 months. And then at the same time, we had the largest mold job we've ever performed going on. And then we had a very large fire in our downtown community that we were brought in to serve those folks, all happening at the exact same time. So it was chaos, and we had to find order internally and externally during that. And then we went into a slower time last fall. It's typical for our part of the country in restoration work. And I think, one of the real, so now we're steady, but we're not as busy as we would like to be. And so the difference between, what's today, August 21st? Yeah, August 21st this year and last year, in some ways are like night and day. But last year allowed us to build muscle that we probably didn't realize we had, but we were able to uncover it and build it. Now I think we find ourselves in a position where we're longing for more of those kinds of stretches in our business. And to be quite honest, there's a bit of frustration with that because we can't control all of the circumstances. But we did deliver on the promises we made, and our community knows that. And so when those opportunities arise again in the next 12 months, and they will, we know we'll be better prepared to tackle them.
So what does, as a quick follow-up to that, Chris, what you described is, you've described, broadly 3 phases of the business. And, you talk about this phase where, hey, this time last year, we were really feeling the squeeze. Sometimes I'll tell my team when we're in the middle of moments like that, I'll say like, hey, remember, we had to work really hard for these problems. So let's appreciate these problems because, these are the types of problems that sometimes people, really hope for these types of challenges. So you're in the middle of the cooker, and then you go into a period where it's a bit, there's a bit of a calm, and then you kind of go back into a period where things are picking up, but they're not as straining, and you're almost wishing you were back in that kind of crucible moment. What does communication look like at Peerless? And if you could speak to any structures or rituals or cadences that you hold to that you think really drives communication, because there's a lot of change that you're describing. I'm just curious, what communication looks like at Peerless.
Yeah, not really, but there are times during that stretch. I mean, I can remember, without going into detail, a really challenging meeting that we had with key leaders on those 3 projects that were going on at the same time. And we are big on cross-training our people so that our folks can work in water and they can work in fire and they can crawl air ducts and, all those. Anyway, so there, for us, one of our core values is courage, having the courage to speak, not in an ugly fashion or in a harmful fashion, but to speak the truth about a situation and then say, okay, how do we tackle that? And we have 2 locations, 45 minutes apart, so we share our people resources back and forth depending upon where the needs are greatest. But at that time, the needs were great everywhere. And so there had to be daily communication. And I mean, just in full transparency, there were days where that was tense and stressful because somebody needed one more guy or one more gal, and they couldn't have one more guy or one more guy in the other community because they needed them as well. And so I think Brad, and this goes back to the culture Brad has built and his parents before him, a place of integrity and a place of courage and honesty. That's not comfortable. I would say some of our communication feels like what we talk about around here often, which is let's learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Matt, I'm going to let you dive in.
I mean,
What do you think, Matt?
it's hard to top that. I mean, you kind of nailed everything on the head. But, back to communication, I think, Chris, as you said, about a year ago, we were busier than maybe we've ever been, now we're just steady. But I think it also helped in a lot of ways. We found a lot of our weaknesses, our underlying weaknesses that we may not have realized were there, or we just may kick that can down the road a little. But I think that when we were that busy and going through that period of time, it helped us open up for areas of room of improvement. And I would have said you nailed it on the head. I mean, communication would be one of the top areas because, we had guys from both markets that were trying to pull resources from each location, but we don't have any resources left, So, and just figuring out how to make do with what we got. And I mean, communication is definitely a huge thing that I think was definitely a little bit of an eye opener. That I think I would say that in my opinion, we've gotten better on, and I'm thankful that we went through that period of time and that opened that up for us.
The only other thing I would add to that I think helps us with our communication in the busyness of our day-to-day work, which always comes, as top priority, is when we do a weekly leadership meeting, and a part of that meeting is just for folks to share updates in their divisions and to keep everybody on board and to say, hey, here is where I have witnessed our core values at work, and so there's encouragement there. And here is where I need some help. There's a bottleneck on this project, and I need some help with this. So I think those meetings, while sometimes they feel like one more thing for folks to do, it's forced us to be in a room together when we're busy and communicate with one another when it would be easier maybe not to because there's so much work to.
Yeah, and like you said,
so what I'm here,
Chris, on that too. I mean,
you go ahead, Matt.
Okay. To those meetings that Chris is talking about, it helps us be able to connect on another level with our employees. It's not so work and operational based, if that makes sense. And I think when it comes time to help each other out and share things back and forth with each other, the more you get to know someone, it really helps out with key communication and improving that.
So let me put this back to you guys, and you tell me if I captured this correctly. So the business has, to use your term, Chris, has these unpredictable aspects of it. And so what it sounds like what you guys have found is working is let's create a routine cadence of talking about a subject that I think one appeals to people. Leadership is super relevant, reflects our values, but also we spend so much time day in and day out living the same challenges, aware of the same projects, dealing with the same restraints, that to have one conversation a week where, let's call it, it's a relevant but not directly related conversation to the problems of the day. I think that's what you're saying. It's relevant because we're sharing experiences that came out of this business that we're all part of, but it sounds like it's focused on almost like a third subject, where the first subject is, the day-to-day, the second is all the dynamic between us and colleagues, but it's like a related third topic on leadership. Is that a fair summary? Like it's routine, it's weekly, it's populated by people who have context in the day-to-day, but it's not directly focused on the day-to-day. It's a unique business meeting or a unique meeting where we're focused on let's call it a central topic that has just, let's call it relevance and appeal to the team. Is that a fair summary? What do you think, Chris?
I would say absolutely. Yeah, it's like you've been in the meetings. Yeah. You just summarized it. Would you agree, Matt?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with it.
It's interesting. Sometimes I'll hear teams that will do, like, I'll give you 4 examples. I won't name any names of companies. There's a company that I'm quite familiar with in the industry, and they do once a month, they do kind of almost like a financial health meeting for team members who are trying to get out of debt. And so what's relevant is the business is the source of their income, and it plays quite a substantial role in helping them get out of debt. But also it's just a general meeting where they're just talking with colleagues who have so much in common, and yet they're talking about they're talking about something where they're all equals in that moment, so to speak. Another business that I'm aware of, they have a routine of having like a Bible study, like a prayer meeting, right? And so again, in that moment, we have so much in common. We all know, maybe a person's prayer topic is that person sitting across from me would stop being a mean project manager. But at the end of the day, it's this routine of bringing the team together. We have so much in common, yet the topic of the meeting is something that appeals to everyone, and yet it's a normalizing, equalizing meeting. And then obviously, there's your example, but another one that pops to mind is a business that I have that they get together and they just have a happy hour. They just kind of have a happy hour, and they kind of do almost every week. Someone in the team does a bit of a show and tell on one of their hobbies, like one of their interests. And so in a sense, it kind of gives the team an opportunity to say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but I'm really into smoking meat. I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually like a really talented musician. But it brings the teams together. It's not like anyone for a moment has amnesia and they forget about the challenges of the day, but they get to kind of focus on something that matters, that is a kind of a level playing field for everyone. Any response to that, Chris?
I love the sound of all of those things. Some of those feel a little more similar to what we're doing than maybe others. Yeah. But I will say that when we sit down for that weekly meeting, and that by the way, we don't do it during the summer, mainly because, folks are vacationing more and all that kind of thing. And it kind of breaks up the rhythm of that. And we believe rhythm is a big piece. That meeting is kind of an equalizer. We don't come in there with like people are at this level or that level, or these are colleagues, these are teammates, these are folks, and I love the thing about, hey, you didn't know this about me, but I love to play music. I don't. I wish I could, but so that wouldn't be one of mine. But we'll probably steel that and add that to a little piece of our meeting. So I'll stop there, Matt. You may have something else.
Yeah, on the house. Well, Matt, before you respond, let me also kind of queue up the next question here, and certainly respond if there's anything you want to add to that. Because what I want to do, guys, is in the time we have remaining, which I know is short, I do want I want to cover a lot of ground quickly. So I kind of want to see if you would have an appetite for kind of a popcorn round, where I just really put you on the spot and just give me kind of your 15 to 20 second response. Is that okay?
Yeah, it works for us.
Okay. All right. Matt, did you want to add anything to Chris's comment there around just that kind of equal playing field dynamic?
No, I love it. I think I love the idea of, almost the show and tell or the hobby deal. I think we might have to figure out a way to incorporate in that in ours, because I just love that. I think it's a great idea. Whoever's company's doing that, what a great idea.
Okay. Yeah, someone can feel like, in short, you can have someone who's kind of the new gal, and she just, feels like she's fumbling in her role and feels silly, and that nobody knew that actually, like, she's like a Div 1 athlete or something. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
like, you have no idea, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, like, actually, you're driving me crazy because you keep screwing up these claims, but there's clearly areas of your life where you're like super confident and super competent. So how do we get you there?
Exactly. How do we find those strengths for sure?
Yeah, totally. Now here we go, boys. So first out of the gate, Chris, when you get in the office, what's the first metric? What's the first KPI you want to hear?
The first thing I would look at is job status, ongoing job, the school, and how those are being handled, and then our overnight calls, our on-call calls that came in after hours.
Okay, and why? Why does that matter to you?
Well, it goes back to the promises we make and taking care of those people. So if we know a job's still out there and it needs to be, it's starting to feel like, hey, we have to get this done. What's the schedule look like? Who's on that job? And what's the timeline look like to get it wrapped up? And then what calls came in after hours, overnight last night, and what are we doing about them? Where are we at? Did we respond? If not, why not? If so, how did it go? And what's our next step?
Yeah, tight, nice. Matt, I have heard from reputable sources that you're pretty good at what you do. So I'm curious, what would you say, Matt, are a couple things that personally you believe really kind of give you an edge as a high performing individual at Peerless?
Would say having integrity and delivering on my promises that I tell people, and I think that's huge for me. And also taking care of your employees and treating them like family. I think if you can really live with integrity, take care of your clients and take care of your employee, and also work a little bit hard at the same time, I think it can kind of all come together for you. It's not easy all the time, but I think if you do those few things, that can really make a world of difference, especially in our industry.
Yeah, well said. Chris, question to you. Right now, I mean, we're in the middle of Q3, right in the middle of it. What would you say? What's the most urgent issue on your plate this quarter, and how would you say you're going after it?
How do we take the folks that we have identified internally who are technicians and have demonstrated that they have the tools to become job leaders and project managers? How do we move them forward? In fact, we had a meeting earlier today with an outline for one of our folks that falls in that category and said, what are the intentional steps that we need to take now over the next 6 to 8 weeks to get him there? And we outlined that on paper and are preparing to have that meeting. So that's a challenge, because while this year's been a little slower than last year, our trend is, moving up and to the right. We're a growing company. Our needs continue to grow, and therefore our need for really good leaders and project managers continues to grow.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I referenced like a book we did, it was last year, where we talked about, generational businesses. I think it was like the last chapter of the book. And one of the things we really talk about is hey, in this market, seems from all the stuff we've looked at and all the data we look at and all the businesses we interview, one of the things that has really just come front, like just right to the front, is that the businesses that can build their leaders versus buy their leaders are outperforming others, right? And so, as you describe building into this capacity to build your talent, very exciting. Matt, question for you. There's this term that is, this term called sacred cow, sacred cow, like this idea that we've probably all heard some story of somebody who, you ask, why do you do it that way? And you're like, oh, because this and this. And then, someone shows up and they're like, actually, that's just the way Doug did it once. And we just have done it the same ever since, or whatever. Right. So from your position, Matt, you're in a unique position in that you would have heard stories about how your grandfather did it, and then stories about how your folks did it, and now you've seen it. What's an example of something that you would say was something maybe you thought was a sacred cow, something that you can't change, but you said, you know what, we've changed it to improve the business?
I would say a big one for me would be everything we did for so long was all paper related, paper files, and there's a paper trail to everything. And that's just always the way we've always done it. And, the world's changing, we live in, businesses are changing, and you've got to keep up with that technology side of things. And so we have implemented a new software and technology system where we are trying to go paperless, and we're not 100% there yet, but we have made huge strides. And I think that's something that I always loved, the idea of going paperless, but I didn't know how people would take it that have been here for 20 years, 25 years, that I'm like, how am I going to explain that this is better for them? And this makes everyone's job easier, from the admin down to our people in the field, just all the way throughout. But I think now that we're in the process of switching over, because in January, I think people are starting to see the value and added benefit that it can bring to us, and make us more efficient as well.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, the amount of technological change that Peerless has observed and witnessed in the time it's been in business is pretty amazing, right? Like, there's a lot of people that are going to listen to our conversation, and your business would have been there when like the internet came in.
Right.
What I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yes.
yeah.
I
mean, it's like your business has been through some like legit mega changes, right?
Yeah.
I bet your dad tells stories about when he got his first cell phone, right? And like,
Yeah.
and he would have probably been rocking a Peerless shirt.
Right. And he had a pager. He always had a
So-
pager on his hip, like, he's on call that would beep. And I'm not real, I think it connected to a phone. I'm not sure. I just remember when I was young and that pager going off at all random times of the night.
Yeah, I've heard stories of like kind of an evidence that you've been in the industry for like a legit long time is that
Yeah.
if anything vibrates, you have like a moment of like PTSD, right? You're just like, ah, you're like,
Yes,
hey,
right.
no, it's not a, it's,
Yeah,
well,
and then sometimes I feel like I hear my phone in my sleep. You know what I mean?
yeah, I've called it, I back in the day, I ran a pretty sizable kind of trades company, and I called it my phantom phone calls, these like phantom phone calls.
Yeah.
And, you know, the amount of times I'd reach for my phone, I'd be like, even to this day, it's almost humorous, but even to this day, I just can't have my phone on vibrate, you know? I can have it on, I can hear it ring, you know, because I can change the ringer, right?
Right.
But man, I just don't know. I think something traumatic happened to me over that decade. I just can't handle a vibrate. But okay, last question here, guys. Well, you know, I kind of have a quick follow up, but I want to put this to you, Chris. I mean, right now, some of these businesses, you know, it's fun to compare notes, and I think that so much of what you guys are doing is very inspiring. But some guys are like, hey, I'm in the pressure cooker right now. And you know, and some of the data that I've looked at, I mean, you know, there's a lot of businesses that, you know, probably thinking they may not come out of this year still in business. And so, Chris, you know, from your perspective, you know, if we had kind of two GoPro lenses, you know, kind of first person monitoring leaders in this industry, and one was focused on a strong leader, what do you think strong leaders are doing differently right now to just come out of this season ahead?
Think we just talked about technology, and I think because, well, my experience tells me that because we have so much technology that we have lost a bit of our focus if we're not intentional on relationships with people. Relationships for us are everything. We've said making promises and keeping promises more times than anybody wants to hear today. But that is a driver for us. Relationships are everything. And I think in a tough marketplace, they even go up to a whole nother level, that we have to know the people that we serve, and we have to take care of those people. One of our core values is delivering world-class service. And we talk about world-class service every day because relationships matter, promises that we make matter. And I think leaders that are making great progress are delivering on relationships of trust, clients and people in their communities. I think leaders that are making a difference in a difficult market are leaning into efficiencies and finding as many efficiencies as possible. And I think great leaders are doing everything they can to build into their people, because their people that are in the trenches every day feel the pressure as much or more than anyone. And when they know that somebody has their back, and I know it's an overused phrase, but when they know there are folks who are walking beside them and wanting to bring them along to help them be the best people, not just employees, but best people they can be, they help you deliver on your promises that much better.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, very well said, Chris. And, you know, when I just reflect on our conversation here, guys, you know, I think that one of the things that I believe, you know, just from the first time I think you and I chatted, Chris, I think we were at a Restoration Affiliates event, you know, shout out Restoration Affiliates. I think it's an awesome group of businesses. And I just said like, you know, like I could see there's definitely some common denominators there. And, you know, even, I mean, hey, I'm not trying to just plug my stuff here, but our mission statement at Know How is helping companies deliver what they promise through confident workforces, right? That's our statement. Because I just believe that, you know, when you consider the whole landscape of what's going on, the human dynamic, the technology landscape, the acceleration of weather events, there's all this stuff. To me, what's ultimately under threat is, I think that increasingly leaders and teams have very logical reasons why they didn't deliver on their promise. Like a person could make a reasonable case why, and for these reasons, I couldn't deliver on what I promised you. But when companies do say, no, our promises matter, like what you're saying, Chris and Matt, at Peerless, to me, not only do I think it's refreshing, inspiring, I also think it's a competitive advantage nowadays. Because it's not like the market has like been open to like accommodating periodic promise delivery. You know what I'm saying? Like the market craves people who will do what they say they're going to do. That may not be the words that they use, but you found a way to build a culture that values courage and promise delivery, and you're led by a leader who believes in opportunity creation. And I think it's really inspiring. You know, I want to just give each of you guys kind of an opportunity just to kind of close us out here. Matt, to the incoming generations, like the individuals who are kind of these, let's call it these up and comers, and they're really questioning whether or not, this industry is really want to really build a career. What's your encouragement to
I
them?
would just say that, if you're really considering, the upcoming generation to get into this industry, you're going to have your ups and downs, but just stay the course, work hard, and just don't give up, because it's what we do is not always fun. It's not always amazing, beautiful work, but in the end, it's one of the most rewarding things that I have in my life. And I think that's for most people, or most restorers, I would say. So that's what I would say. When the times get tough, just remember that it's going to get better, and you're taking care of people and helping other people out when they're in a time of.
Well said. And Chris, just last word to you. I think about, there's a whole cohort of individuals whose job is to lead leaders and to create opportunity and to identify leaders and to sometimes help someone see the potential to be a leader. And then they need to develop those leaders. I mean, that is not a job for the faint of heart. That's a job, regardless of whether a person is a person of faith. I don't think you can be a leader of leaders without having some measure of faith. So what's your encouragement for people that are in a similar role to you, where you really need to be that leader of leaders through what is kind of a tough market right now?
I don't know if this advice is unique to this role, but it certainly is helpful. And I would say that every leader should always stay in growth mode themselves. I have far from reached the finish line of the growth that I need to experience in my life, personally and professionally. And so I always regularly advise, folks I'm close with or friends, that they ought to have a personal board of directors. Have 3 people in your life who you trust and they trust you, and with whom you can share everything, literally everything with, including, your goals and the things you're going to do to achieve those goals, so that they have your permission at any given time to speak into your life truthfully, even if it's truth that you don't want to hear at that time, but you need to hear. For me, those few people in my life, while at times it could be pretty challenging, I know they're speaking into my best interest. And again, like I said earlier about some other things, that just kind of gives me additional gasoline in the tank to hopefully become a better leader, and then hopefully be able to have some kind of an impact on helping others develop into leaders.
Very interesting. Very cool. Got me thinking. Yeah, you guys get the show and tell thing going at Peerless, and I've got to get my board of directors going on here. Yeah, I think that's good advice. Well, look, Matt, Chris, and Brad and the whole crew at Peerless. I think that it's really inspiring. So many of the things that you're doing, and just the mindset that you guys are doing it with. I think there's a lot of, to the point we made earlier, there's a lot of meat on the bone on this discussion. I think we could probably have spent a whole another hour digging into some of these discussions. But hey, you guys are busy. So thanks for not only being generous with your time, but being generous with your advice and your perspective. And I just wish you guys nothing but just a strong close to the year and success as you guys continue to move things ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity, and always good to see you. Thanks.
Yeah, you too. Okay, guys. Special thanks to Chris and Matt for showing what they built after everything broke at once. Something Chris said that keeps coming back. Last year allowed us to build muscle that we probably didn't realize we had. That reframes crisis, not as something to survive, but as diagnostic equipment showing exactly where your systems are weak. Most operators fear unpredictability. Chris and Matt use it to reveal what needs reinforcing, then spend quiet periods deliberately building what the chaos exposed. That's how you go from surviving the perfect storm to wanting it back. The market is tough right now, but operators like Chris and Matt show you can survive it with systems that hold and a discipline to build leaders before you need them. Thanks for listening to Mission Critical. We'll see you in the next episode.